Christian Ramirez Camba. He's a PhD in animal science and has a master's in data science. He's currently working as a postdoc researcher at the University of Minnesota. And so today he is going to share with us about prioritizing enhanced nitrogen utilization efficiencies and how that should be a key objective for us in the swine industry. So thank you, Christian.
Thank you for the introduction. As an introduction, I'm going to talk about that the swine industry is an interconnected system. In the previous presentations, we saw different interconnections that the swine industry has with manure, with soil, with agricultural in general. So we can say that from a sustainable research point of view, we study the dynamics between the components of the system, in this case, with the swine production in the center. We study the interconnections between the different components of the system. Now, our research, with the research we're doing in our department, is focusing on this dynamics between the components, but also the dynamics within the component. So what is happening inside the swine industry and how is that interconnected to the other components of the system, with the aim of improving the different parts so we improve the efficiency of the entire system. I'm going to talk, that will be my main presentation today, to say how we study these dynamics, or how studying these dynamics within the system will benefit the entire system at the end, with the goal of increasing the sustainability and decreasing the impact of animal agriculture. So we know that in the dynamics within the system, or within the swine industry, we have different levels. We have the pig, we have the barns, we have a combination of barns, and then we can have different layers we get to the bigger system. As an example, we can say, for example, we do research in the research barns, and the data or the knowledge we get from our research barn, we apply it into production sites. So it's important to understand how these different levels of organization works, because they have different characteristics, and they need to be studied, and understanding what are the dynamics, so we can extrapolate data, we can study different levels, and we can study the entire system. Because if we have a poor understanding of one component of the system, we'll have a poor understanding of the entire system. So our goal is to understand the different parts that form the system, basically to make everything more efficient. And this will be the main point of my presentation. So how do we study swine production, or how do we study the different layers or the different levels we have in swine production? How do we study pigs, or the research we do in research barns, and then we apply it to production sites? We basically follow the scientific method. So we design experiments, collect data from experiments, analyze this data, and then we came to interpretation and conclusions. So what is in the middle of all of this is that we base everything on different assumptions. So the way we design experiments, collect the data, analyze and interpret is based on a set of assumptions. This is incomplete information that is the base of is the main idea before we do all these steps. And this set of assumptions can be called like conceptual models or mathematical models, or these assumptions are the basis for our conceptual mathematical models. And depending on the models we choose, we collect data differently, we design experiments differently, we analyze the data, and we can reach with the same data, with the same conditions, we can reach into different conclusions, different interpretations. And our focus is to understand the conceptual mathematical models we're using to try to understand the system potentially differently than what we've been doing, especially since we have important problems in the swine industry. So we are trying to change the way we approach the problem to try to see if we can identify other problems. And that's the main part of our research. So I'm going to, in order to show like why it's important to understand the different layers that we have in our production systems, or the different layers we have in the swine industry, I'm going to give one example. I'm going to mention about low protein diets. So let's assume that we perform an experiment where we have a control diet, which is a regular corn soybean meal diet, and then we have a treatment diet. What happens with the treatment is a similar diet than the control, but we reduce soybean meal. We reduce, let's say, from about 12% soybean meal, and we add from 12% to around 10%, and we add crystalline amino acids, right? This is a simple experiment we can perform in a barn. We perform the experiment, and in each group, we have 1,200 animals per group. Perform the experiment, and we get no differences among groups, and we say, okay, we can replace soybean meal with crystalline amino acid, no problem, and then we're gonna save some money. What is the problem with this specific example is that in the control group, we have 12.1 crude protein, and the treatment group, we have 11.4 crude protein, so the crude protein went down by less than 1%. So what I'm trying to say here is we are causing an effect that is less than 1%. If we assume that that will have an effect on production in the same proportion, so for example, if we increase mortality from 10% to 10.7%, which will be 120 to 128 animals, in this experiment, we don't have the capacity to measure that effect. So we don't have the numbers. In order to detect these small numbers, we need hundreds of thousands of animals. We need more than 100,000, and this number is probably in good conditions. So what I'm showing with this study is sometimes we extrapolate data from one single experiment to bigger populations, in which in the small populations we don't see the effect, but in bigger populations we start to see the effect, but we cannot associate that because we assume there are no differences between treatments. And if we consider that statistical methods or science itself is not designed to accept null hypothesis, in this experiment we're accepting that the two groups have no differences, and we can call it, or in statistics we can call it like the Earth is flat problem. We're trying to measure the roundness of the Earth with a ruler, for example. We don't have the means to study that. And if we accept the null hypothesis, this is basically an opinion paper, an opinion study, but it's not a scientific study, because we are not considering the potential effects this strategy has when we extrapolate that data to bigger populations. So in this case, in this specific study, for example, which this data is real, they say, okay, reduce crude protein, add amino acids. There are other companies, researchers groups that says reduce protein, and you get your optimal profit, and you will see no effect. Maybe you will reduce a little bit of growth, and you will make a lot of money. When you apply that to your system, you probably will gonna lose money. And the problem is these pigs are more susceptible. And because we accept what our scientists are telling us, we just accept that it happens, and when we see increased mortality, decreased pork production, we don't know why. And the problem is we didn't understand how the research is done in one layer and how that information cannot be extrapolated to higher levels without taking into account these things, for example, right? So this is part of the research we're doing, trying to understand how the flow of information from one level to the other. So here again, what happens is we decrease dietary nitrogen, we decrease manure, and we are sure about this because we are designing the diet, and we are sure that the diet has less nitrogen. Because the system cannot create nitrogen, the nitrogen output will go down. But we don't have the capacity to measure other effects. And we are simply assuming no effects is happening. But when we extrapolate this to a bigger population, then that happens. And the other problem is these pigs that are receiving less nitrogen or less protein are more susceptible. So that means that not in every case we'll see problems. So maybe if there is a challenge, these animals are more susceptible, and we might see them sometimes and sometimes not. But we have to understand that in principle, what happened in the research barn, we have to be careful to what statistical methods, mathematical methods, and assumptions are using to extrapolate the parts in the other part of the system. And why is this important from the point of view of sustainability? It's basically because if we define efficiency, for example, from the amount of nitrogen that is in pork, divided by the amount of nitrogen that is in manure, the pigs that are dying because of or are removed from the barns, those are pigs that do not produce edible pork, but they do produce manure until the point they are removed. So we are causing the efficiencies to go down without even noticing, because we are not making a holistic approach, understanding the different levels. So then it's important to consider survival. The thing is, we need, in order to consider survival and other aspects of production or research, we have different strategies. We can, for example, use more animals. We probably need hundreds of thousands of animals, which might not be practical, or we can change the methods we're using for doing research. There are multiple ways we can improve that, but methods that allow us to study this, because traditional methods, as simple ANOVA or the experiment I mentioned before, won't allow us to see this. And because it doesn't allow us to see this, it won't make this true. It wouldn't mean that what happened will be based on our interpretation, because that's what we really want to happen. I'm going to talk about another model, and now going to the level of the animal. Instead of going, for example, from a research barn, I'm going to go to the level of the animal, and I'm going to talk about a model I developed during my PhD, which is called linear logistic model. I'm going to talk about a little bit about this. So I'm going to talk about how we define requirements, amino acid requirements in pigs. So in pigs, we give different groups of animals increased levels of amino acids. And then we define as the requirement as the point where we don't see more growth in the animals. So we start giving them more and more amino acids at the point where growth is maximized, and we assume after that growth won't go higher. Then we say, okay, this is what the animal requires. This is the traditional view of the requirements. What I've discovered is a different pattern, a pattern that has this shape, and this is a different response. And based on our calculations, we are proposing to consider the requirements to a higher level. And now it's important to consider that animals don't have requirements. They have responses. We have requirements because we have to pay our loans, we have to meet our production objectives, but animals only have responses, and they adapt to the different conditions that are they have around. So what we are proposing here is there is this response in the right side, and then our goal is to study what is happening. So and this is the linear logistic. It's called linear logistic because the function is described by a linear function from which a logistic function is subtracted, but I'm not going to talk a lot about the math behind this. Now, why this response happens in animal, what this response means, and then we know that when we provide amino acid to pigs, they will start building protein, right? So this is the point where we assume, or based on the data we have, we can say that it's the point where the amino acid intake maximizes lean tissue deposition. What happens after that point where we provide animals with greater levels of amino acid is they start to break it down. Their amino acid catabolism increases, and this amino acid catabolism biosynthesize different metabolites that are associated with health. So after this point, the essential amino acid they're consuming, start to produce a lot of different metabolites that increase their health. And our calculations suggest that at this green line is where this metabolite production is maximized and health-related functions are maximized. And these are the levels we're studying right now to try to see how we can use these dynamics for our benefit. And then after this point, or during the entire different levels of amino acid, excretion happens, but after this point, we assume the excretion increases, but we still need to study these dynamics, right? Currently, our current models assume that amino acid catabolism and excretion is the same, and we try to avoid catabolism. In this view, we need catabolism because that provides health to the animal, increased survival, increased robustness, increased reproduction, and a series of things that are linked with our objectives if we want to reduce mortality and improve sustainability of swine production. So basically, we have two different levels of amino acid. That one will maximize protein synthesis or growth, and the other one will maximize the metabolic status of the animal. And as I mentioned, animals don't have requirements, have responses. We can use these responses to our benefit depending on what are our objectives. We want to maximize growth or health, and we have to play with this depending on how we want to handle our production systems. So what we've seen at these levels, if we've seen increased fetal growth and development, milk production, gut health, a series of different effects we've seen at these levels. For example, regarding fetal growth and development, we've seen that at this point, pigs are not necessarily bigger. The data we have shows that litter size and piglet birth weight increase. But not only that, but the piglets are more physiologically developed. So these pigs might be the same size as other pigs, but their systems are more developed. The immune system, the gastrointestinal tract is more developed, and when they are born, they're surviving better. They can they survive more when there are challenges. In milk production, so there is some research done by Dr. Chantal Farmer in Canada, and she said that if we increase 40% more lysine, we see an increment in mammary gland development. And she proposes 40%, and this green line is 40% higher than current requirements. So this matches with different things we've seen biologically, different things we've seen in the barns, different things that other research have seen. So this has important. We have seen also increases in sow longevity because the sows have more amino acid to biosynthesize things that will maximize their health, long-term health. And these levels are higher than current requirements. Now, in this publication, this was published this year, we explain a little better about the model. And something that I find interesting is this response being observed in different species, in fish, shrimp, poultry, pigs, dairy cows, humans, dogs, in different species. So we're trying to understand how we can use these responses to our benefit in terms of longevity and health for different species and even humans. Now, my interpretation or my explanation of why this thing happens and trying to understand the story of why these dynamics occur, I used the wild boar research to try to explain why this happens, right? So I mentioned there is a dynamics between growth and health, or some trade-off between growth and health. So when amino acid supply goes down, it makes sense that the animal will prioritize lean tissue for different reasons. The first one is hiding. So we know, for example, that pregnant sows or pigs in general, they are trying to hide their lameness because they don't want to look weak. So they are prioritizing lean tissue over other functions because they don't want the predators to know they're weak and they won't target them. So what I'm saying is animals, when the amino acid supply increases, animal prioritize first lean tissue and then health. But that's opposed to our current vision in nutrition. We assume when the animals grow, all the other needs were already met. Where we are proposing is something different. So the animals need that for hiding, but also need that for movement. When they don't have enough supply, research in wild boar have shown that the animal increases their home ranges, but they're also more exposed to predators, and then it makes sense that they deposited more lean tissue because they need this for movement and escape predation, increasing their survival, the short-term survival. So what this says is short-term survival, lean tissue maximizes short-term survival, but sacrifices long-term survival. And research in wild boar shows that when they have optimal, or they have availability of nutrients, they reduce their mobility to small areas, and then what we presume based on the biology and the ecology is that the animals now, they can afford to prioritize long-term health. So these dynamics seen in wild boar and other animals agree with the explanation from the physiological responses we've seen. And this is just another way of explaining what is going on with these dynamics we are exploring. Now, as I mentioned, there is a trade-off between growth and health. And then if we're feeding animals for growth, our data shows that the animals are there is an increased mortality. There is increased health issues and a decrease in nitrogen efficiency, and this is because growth will maximize short-term survival and not long-term survival. Another problem is when we do research in our research barns, we do it for a short period of time, and then everything will be maximized during that period. So it's not only important to extrapolate that to the levels that are above, but in time. Maybe that pig will perform really good during 7 days under that regimen, but not a month or 2 months or things like that. So these are the complex dynamics we're trying to study, and I wish I had more time to explain all of that. But our data suggests feeding animals for growth are decreasing the long-term efficiency or the nitrogen footprint because more animals are being removed from barns. If we feed animals for health, which is where we are proposing, we have increments in short-term cost because the feed will increase. We have to provide them with more amino acid, but there is also a trade-off because the animals might decrease their lean tissue deposition because their priority shifts. Now they're more concerned about their long-term survival, and they might deposit a little less lean tissue. But then we have to play with that. In certain stages of production, we want to maximize growth. In others, we want to maximize reproduction or lean tissue. So for example, for a weaned pig, it makes more sense to increase the survivability than growth rates. And for a growing pig, it makes sense more to maximize growth rate. So basically, we are not defining requirements, but playing with the different responses they have to different conditions. So what you're proposing these dynamics to use it for our benefit. And our research suggests that feeding animals for health, or the levels that I'm proposing with the linear logistic model, will decrease mortality, decrease health issues, and increase the nitrogen efficiency in the long term. All of this will reduce the nitrogen footprint, because basically we're investing more in survival, we save more animals, and at the end we get more pork. Now, the data we have suggests that the growth strategy is not working, basically because there is a survival bias. We are producing the pigs that survive very efficiently, but in some studies we base all our conclusions in the pigs that survive, ignoring the pigs that didn't survive because we don't have the numbers or the methods to study this mortality. So basically that gives us a false sense of efficiency, because we're not considering how to extrapolate data in time between levels, and how to study, or we don't consider the different assumptions we are having when doing this. And then the research we were doing here with Dr. Pedro Urriola, it's like proposing a shift in these conceptual models, in these mathematical models, in these assumptions. So with the same data, the same equipment, the same animals, we can analyze or view everything differently. With that, I'd like to thank my previous research was funded by a Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and our future research is funded by Real Pork Trust Consortium. And with that, I'll try to answer any question you might have.